All right. Hello and welcome in, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hong Win, and I'm a part of the Careers and Professional Development team. Specifically, I serve as the Employer Relations Partner here at WGU, where we get great employers and organizations connected with our students and alumni and vice versa. I'm very excited for today's session and to introduce our very own WGU alum, Dr. Gilbert Guzman, who is the Recruiting Director at Allied Universal. And he is here to share with us today on the topic of the power of data. So, with that, Dr. Guzman, I will go ahead and pass things over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Hung. Welcome everybody. It's definitely a pleasure to be here with I guess I could say fellow future alum of WGU. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the power of data or the power of data within leadership. So without further ado, I'm going to dive right into the agenda, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the information that I have for you today. So we'll start off with an introduction. I'll kind of dive into a little bit about who I am, how I kind of got where I'm at today. I will share a little bit about the company that I currently work for, which is Allied Universal. And then we'll talk about just leadership and management. I always like to differentiate between the two to help kind of understand how does data work in the realm of leadership and management. And then we'll talk about the role of data in leadership, challenges of data and leadership, and then the future of data. And as Hung had mentioned, we have a little bit of time dedicated towards the end for Q&A. The goal for today is not to give you a lecture, if you will, on data as a whole, but just some of the things to consider as you're kind of thinking about your career as you finish whichever degree program you're in at WGU, but really to understand what is data today, right? What are some of the aspects and components of data that we can leverage and utilize to be successful not only in our careers but even personally. So, as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Gilbert Guzman. Sometimes I just go by Gilbert. I recently just earned my doctorate. I completed it in 2024. Prior to that, had spent a little bit of time at WGU and then got my undergrad at the University of New Mexico. So, I'm going to go backwards a little bit. So, I started my educational journey, I call it the books, at Auburn University. I was actually a decathlete. I'm a little bit thicker today than I was in the past, but at one point when I finished high school, I was probably 100 pounds less than I am today. So I was actually a decathlete for a little bit. And then I got a little bit bigger and decided to move to the University of New Mexico, where I played football as a tight end for a little bit. And then earned my bachelor's degree in organizational communication with a minor in sociology. Um, During my career, which I'll touch on here shortly, I decided to, expand my educational journey a little bit. So I signed up for WGU. Interestingly, I was actually a partner as I worked for the Kroger company, or the Smiths division within Kroger in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is where I first learned about WGU. So knowing that I was a employee of an organization that was a partner with WGU, and knowing that I had the opportunity to, still work full time and also earn my MBA, I decided to sign up for WGU. I finished my MBA in 2020, so I guess we can call me a COVID baby to some degree from an educational perspective. But I finished in August of 2020, so towards the middle of COVID, if you will. But obviously from an online capacity, I was really not affected much from the pandemic itself. Immediately after completing, I want to say a month after completing my MBA, I was convinced by my wife and my mother-in-law and my own mother to reach for the stars and strive for a doctorate. So I actually signed up a month after. And interestingly, as you progress through your education, when you start looking into doctoral programs, they try to convince you, is this something that you really want to do? But I signed up for my doctorate in business administration with a specialization in the management of engineering and technology. So I spent almost 4 years completing that doctorate, where most of my research really stemmed around, because at the time when I started my doctorate, I was still working at Kroger, grocery retail chain in the United States. So you're probably familiar with it in some capacity, depending on where you're located. But spending a little bit of time in grocery retail, my most of my studies revolved around um, human capital management and kind of the cross of technology, and how do you make sure that the people that you have within your organization are effective, but not only effective, what happens if you don't have those people, right? So looking at the realm of productivity and some of the dependencies of technology in the realm of productivity to ensure that productivity efficiency continue to exist while supporting some of the expectations of any one of your customers. So it was a great journey. I think I would do it all over again. This entire books educational journey, which has kind of led me to where I'm at today. So in 2011, while working on my undergrad degree, I started working at Kroger in Taos, New Mexico. It's actually called the Smith's Division, just one of Kroger's 23, 24 banners. So actually started in Taos, New Mexico as a clerk and decided to finish my bachelor's degree. And once I did that, I actually qualified for an assistant store manager position, which I obtained in 2013. In 2013, after working roughly about a year and a half, I was promoted to a recruiting manager for the Smiths division as well, and moved my family to Salt Lake City, Utah. We lived there for about 2 years. It was a somewhat of a lower level entry kind of level recruiting manager role, overseeing all things staffing for new stores and maintaining some of the staffing for the stores that were already standing. And then to continue my journey in the grocery retail industry, one thing before you can really grow and promote, you have to be a store manager. So I moved to Dallas, Texas, and relocated again from Salt Lake City to Dallas, Texas, and ran my own store for about 2.5 years, where I was then promoted to a recruiting and training manager role. So somewhat of a hybrid role of the 2015 recruiting manager role, but at a higher level, overseeing all things staffing, compliance, and training from start to finish. And then after that, in 2020, I was actually promoted to a senior operations manager out of the corporate office, which is located in Cincinnati, Utah, Cincinnati, Ohio. So that role oversaw freshness and standards, was on the operations team, driving really best practices, behaviors, process improvement, and so on for the entire Kroger company, specific to freshness and standards. I'd left that role, well, simultaneously while working that role after finishing my MBA at WGU. I actually moved into a adjunct professor role at Dallas College. So while maintaining my full-time job at Kroger, I started my adjunct professorship at Dallas College, where I teach human resources management, organizational behavior, principles of management, and business principles. So still doing that job today, but at the same time continuing to grow in my career. I actually left Kroger in the beginning towards the middle of 2021, and actually fell into some of the statistics of the Great Resignation, if any of you are familiar with that phrase. So I actually fell into the statistics of the Great Resignation. I didn't work for about 3 to 4 months, spent some time with my family, primarily just traveling the country, and then decided to get back to work, which is what landed me here today at Allied Universal. So, as the recruiting director for Allied Universal, I oversee roughly 5 states. At one point, it was 10 states for all things recruiting. Very, very high volume recruiting. Once I start talking about Allied Universal here in a second, I'll dive into what my journey and week looks like. But from 2011 to 2021, just a span of roughly 10 years, it took me uh, all over the country, right? I was able to travel all over the country, and also earn not only my doctorate but my MBA as well from WGU. So let's talk about Allied Universal. So where I'm at today, if you are not familiar with Allied Universal, we are actually the third largest employer in the United States. We're seventh globally. outside of the United States. So we are the security that you see, and I'll talk about some of the verticals we have here shortly, but also talk about some of the other business units that we have. But primarily, our bread and butter is the man guarding world of security. So we are right behind Amazon as the third largest employer. So Walmart is number one. Amazon is number two, and then we are number three as the largest employer in the third largest employer in the United States with 800,000 employees globally. We have a little close to about 500,000 in the US directly, and we operate globally in 90 countries. So, as a company, we primarily provide security services. So, I like to say we're the largest company that a lot of people don't notice. What that means is we're typically everywhere you go. Whether you have an HOA, we're probably more than likely, not always, but more than likely, we're the security guards at the front gate, keeping people in from a gated community. We have education verticals, we have retail, chemical, petrochem, utility, so all the oil refineries, most of those that we see down in the Gulf Coast, we usually have security there, facility management, manufacturing and industrial, and healthcare. So we have all these different verticals, a lot of different businesses and organizations that we support as clients, which leads us to being, so large in a contract security perspective. So not only, although our industry is specific, very, very specific to security. We do have a lot of other brands that operate within the or under the Allied Universal umbrella. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have our man guarding is our bread and butter. We have some integrated technology. We have canine security. Most of the canine security is floppy ear dogs, is what we call them. Your Labrador retrievers that are sniffing out weapons. We have executive protection and intelligence. Sometimes, if you look at an NFL game and you see coaches or certain players on a team at an NFL game, sometimes you'll see the guys that are standing there with the earpiece looking around. Sometimes that's us. We have active law enforcement. We have some technology that helps us capture weapons and explosive screening. We have janitorial services, landscaping, cash solutions. So if you have to work in a retail environment and you see a big thing that looks like an ATM, that is more than likely us. We do electronic monitoring, surprisingly, for individuals who are on house arrest and have to wear ankle monitors. Disaster and emergency response investigations specific to usually work comp investigations. We do get outsourced sometimes to do investigations on individuals who should be otherwise injured, and we catch them playing golf. So we call that CNI, to where we have individuals who sit in their car and follow individuals around. And then we have event security, which is one of our largest growing groups within the company. We oversee usually most of the NFL games. So sometimes when you see the yellow jacket individuals that are staring at you in the stands when you go to your local football game or basketball game, that's usually Allied Universal. So just some of the banners that we have down on the bottom. The G4S banner is our most recent acquisition. So Allied Universal, our most recent large acquisition, we partnered and acquired G4S about 3 years ago, right when I started with Allied Universal. But Allied Universal typically grows through acquisition. So we find opportunity within the ranks of whether it's janitorial, event services, security, and so on, and grow through that fashion. Our branding overseas primarily is G4S. We've remained that brand just from a brand equity perspective. But you'll see down here on the bottom that there's an Allied Universal company, G4S, an Allied Universal company. So just a few things that we have as Allied Universal. So whenever I show the company, because we're so large, and this is what really is driving me towards the thought of sharing the power of data within leadership. We do have a purpose that is our tagline is there for you, serving and safeguarding customers, communities, and people around the world, with a vision to be the world's most trusted services partner. And when you think about that, although in this picture you'll see a security guard and we talk about safeguarding, When we think about all of the different verticals we service, all of the different brands and platforms we offer, the goal is to definitely be the world's most trusted services partner. Our mission is through its unparalleled customer relationships, provides proactive solutions, cutting edge smart technology, and tailored services that allow customers to focus on their core businesses with our values of being agile, reliable, and innovative. Our caring culture puts people and safety first, and we deliver through teamwork and always act with integrity. So you're probably wondering, okay, Gilbert just explained his career. He just explained Allied Universal. They're really large, right? So why data, right? Why data? And when I think about data, when Hung reached out to me and said you have to come up with a topic, I said, okay, I'll figure it out. And I pondered for a little bit, and I realized, you know what? I'm immersed in data. So when I think Allied Universal, I think data. So as a large organization of our size, all of the different verticals, all of the different clients and contracts, all the different services we provide, we spend a lot of time in information and data. So it's important that we understand how to manage those things, or how to manage those data, and also how to lead with those data. So one thing I always think about is my role today, right? I'm in recruitment, and as a recruiting director, most of what I do is strategic, trying to find barriers, trying to find solutions to those barriers. But how do I end up finding the solutions without knowing what's going on? So I spend most of my time, which in a recruitment kind of capacity, you're more so on the HR side dealing with the people. But from my perspective, I spend a lot of time in data looking for anomalies, looking for trends. Where am I seeing gaps in performance, and how do I manage through that? So with that, why data, right? And when I think about data, there's two terms that usually get mixed or sometimes confused, and that's leadership and management. So I think it's always important to be able to really define the difference between leadership and management, and how do these work together? How do we ensure that we're focusing on a respective goal the right way? So I always like to define leadership as the ability to guide, influence, and motivate others towards an organization's goals. And then management being the planning, organizing, controlling, and directing a business or organization's resources to achieve the organization's goals. So when you think about all of the previous, and most of you might have learned some of this, but when you think about all of the previous academic theories, whether it's scientific management, whether it's Alex Smith and the Wealth of Nations, we have a lot of information that it's always come back to labor, right? There's always been this drive for labor. So Alex Smith said in his 1776 book, Wealth of Nations, he said, you can really judge a nation's successes based off of their labor, and that was over 300 years ago. So when we think about that, understanding your labor and how do you drive those individuals to the goals is very, very important. So I like to differentiate the two because it helps us understand what we need to do as individuals, which then would lead us into how do we understand how to use the data itself. So the role of data in leadership, it's truly intended to drive the informed decisions. How do we drive a decision based on quantity or qualitative information, or qualitative and or quantitative information, to make sure that our decisions are informed? Um, this helps us move away from intuition to evidence-based leadership. So when we think about intuition, I'd like to use the example of recently I was listening to a podcast. And if you've ever listened to the podcast called Business Wars, look up Business Wars and the specific grouping of episodes called Diet Wars, where the CEO of Nutrisystem, Don Zier, who started in 2012, was very, very driven to right-size Nutrisystem. Their goals, their goals weren't being achieved. Their sales dipped by over 50%. And as coming in as a new CEO, she wanted to know what were some of these things that were driving our successes or lack thereof. So in this whole time, as she's trying to find solutions to some of the barriers or some of the challenges that the company was facing, she spent some time and probed one of her team members, where she asked one of her team members, hey, what are we doing to drive sales? Where this executive had mentioned, we're giving away free shakes, we're giving away free smoothies, breakfast items, and so on, based on the number of items that people are ordering. So this ultimately said, hey, there's some sort of incentive that helps us drive this. And ultimately, we think that it should help us increase our sales. So as she probed in a little bit more, she said, hey, are we profitable from this? Are we seeing an increase in sales, an increase in order volume, and so on? And the executive responded, I think so. And so when you think about data and leadership, understanding that there's so much information out there, we'll touch on this just shortly. When we think about there's so much information out there, the response of "I think so" isn't good enough, right? So Don probed a little bit more and said, "Hey, I want to see the data." Right? The executive came back a day or two later, didn't have the information. He said he's going to have to find the information. And when he came back and actually found the information, it was easy to see that there was not any profitability when it comes from providing those free shakes and breakfast items and so on. So that helped Don make the decision to stop that, right? Let's put our eggs in a different basket and try to drive profitability and increase our sales revenue in a different manner, right? So that helps us understand how to drive our decisions from an informed perspective and moving to evidence-based leadership. So the thought of I think it's helping us wasn't clear enough as we kind of drove through. So with data, there happens to be challenges of this, right? When we think about data, I think most of us are probably familiar with the phrase paralysis by analysis. Sometimes we're heads down, we're stuck in information, we're looking for anomalies, we're looking for trends. One thing I always look at is sometimes we use data or KPIs to drive how we drive our individuals. How do we lead our team members, right? If we think about, we have an organizational goal, whether it's revenue, whether it's bottom line, whether it's lower our expenses, whatever that organizational goal is, we have to know what the information is to get us there, right? So how do we influence those individuals? By understanding the information within the data itself. So paralysis by analysis is we're spending a lot of time reading things, we're not really understanding what's going on with the people or the system itself. I'd like to always reference, and I'll show you who he is shortly, but I always like to reference Dr. Forrester from MIT, who talks about system dynamics. And, he always mentioned in the past, and it's still a relevant term today, the fundamental attribution error, which means that we tend to blame individuals without understanding that there's something broken within the system. So if we understand the information, how are we utilizing that information to drive the individuals, but also impact the system if necessary? Some of the other challenges that exist are obviously the data accuracy and the integrity. Because we're in an information age, we know that we often drive results. And when we drive these results, sometimes we use the information to tell us where we're going. But because we know that we usually, in most organizations, there's some sort of incentive that's tied to KPIs, it's tied to some of the data that you're looking at. Sometimes we run into the challenges of people either interpreting or providing data that's incorrect, right? And most of you at WGU, at least I know in the MBA program, you end up understanding, and when you go through your finance course, you'll learn a little bit about data, and some of the information. How do you read it correctly? So it comes to, what do others understand? Most people, if you put a red, yellow, green chart in front of them, it becomes an eye chart, right? It becomes very confusing. They don't know what's going on. This is why it's important to understand, how do you look at the information, the data that you have, and how do you provide that data to the individuals that need to understand it to help create and understand and or make those informed decisions, right? So those are some of the biggest challenges. But referencing Dr. Forrester a little bit earlier, in 1988, he was at a conference, and Dr. Forrester is from MIT. So he created, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, he created the theory and concept, which is a entire PhD program at MIT is the thought of system dynamics or business dynamics. But one of the challenges is, and you think about when he stated this at one of his conferences in 1988, he said, "We are overwhelmed with information, and perhaps one of the most serious pollutions that we face is information pollution, too much information." So if you think about where we are today, 1988, that was 36 years ago when he said we had too much information, right? We didn't even have the technology. I think the internet or the computers were just coming around at that time. So the technology, the Power BIs of the world, the Tableaus of the world didn't exist, and there was already too much information. So now it's how do we take in that information and utilize that information to make sure that we are effective, making the correct decisions, leading our teams correctly, to make sure that we are not only managing the expectations of the organization to achieve the goals, but also ensure that we are doing it the right way. So last slide I wanted to share, just so we have enough time for Q&A at the end, is just really touch on the future of data. As everybody knows, generative AI, machine learning, AI itself, neural networks, large language models, all of these different types of kind of information tools, information mining, data mining technologies are in play today. I think everybody is at the race, is in a race to see who can produce the best product to, whether it's helping with scheduling, whether it's helping with data analysis. Some of this data processing exists, and all of us will be touched by it at some point in the near future. So I always like to challenge anyone who thinks about data, and when you're leading through it, is usually today, I think there's probably this misnomer or misperception of AI is going to take away my job, right? Depending on your level, we've heard mid-level managers are going to be replaced with AI and so on. But you'll see here, James Wilson and Paul Daugherty created or wrote a book called Human Plus Machine: Reimagining Work in the Age of AI, and they focused on the concept of fusion skills. So when you think about data, when you think about all of these information systems that exist, I challenge everybody to look this book up. Both of them work for Accenture. One is the chief technology officer, and I think the other is the COO. But when you think about this book, Human Plus Machine, is rather than looking at data as some way to replace us or the machines themselves to replace us. How do we focus on the fusion skills, infusing some of that information and some of those skills to help enhance or augment some of the things you do? Most of what exists today it's going to be near impossible to replace individuals or replace humans with technology, but we will have the opportunity to partner with technology to make us faster, right? Make us stronger in our day-to-day lives, whether it's education, whether it's technology itself, or even fast food to some degree. So challenge everybody to look at it at that way. And with that, Hung, that is my kind of short presentation. So I want to thank everybody for joining and spending some time with me. So if you ever want to have some conversation with me, feel free to reach out. I put both of my work emails. Either one of those come to both my work phones and so on. So it was a pleasure, and I'll open the floor up. Thanks.
Perfect. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert Guzman. So we weren't able to get the chat feature to work just yet, but we do have Slido in apps. So if you go to the bottom right of your screen, there should be an apps section. You hit that, the Slido app should pull up for you. And from there, you should be able to enter in any questions or comments that you would have for Dr. Gilbert Guzman here. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation there. A lot of good information on the power of data. Um, one of the questions we had just kind of asking around for a career quest here. Do you have any advice for students on how they can stand out in their application when they're applying for Allied Universal?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So, depending on the position that you have, that you're interested in, Allied Universal actually sees a lot of applicants. We see over close to 2 million applicants. And again, depending on the position you're looking for, I'm thinking from a security guard perspective, but including of some of our administrative roles, we see over 2 million applicants every year. So I can understand why you asked that question because you can get lost in the shuffle. One of the biggest things is just making sure that you answer all of the questions because the applicant tracking system we use does have some pre-screening questions that help filter individuals out. It's not AI driven, but it is based off of what I call knockout questions. So just be sure that you're answering those questions that are relevant to the job itself, right? If there's an age requirement, if there's a clearance requirement, and so on, make sure you have those things prior to make or you meet those criteria for those respective jobs that you're looking at to ensure that you don't get automatically knocked out. The only other thing that I would say to add to that is be sure to have a resume. I know that one thing we're working on is because the world has you upload your resume and then you got to go fill out the application, right? We are working on shortening our application. And so some of the questions that we may have or look forward to ask one of the candidates usually lies in your resume. So just make sure that you have an up-to-date resume when you upload it, because often we do see roughly 50% of our applicants don't upload a resume. But that's what I would say is probably the simplest.
Awesome, thank you. Another question we have here, what are some opportunities for professional development and growth within the company?
So Allied Universal actually has a really, really robust training program. So development itself is we have, and I'll give you a statistic. So roughly 65% to 70% of our leaders are all internally promoted. So we have a really, really large internal promotion percentage. So and sometimes it moves pretty quickly. But the development programs we have in place are we have what's called the Next Level Leadership Program. That's a program to prepare individuals for their next level, whatever that is. Usually we look at a director of operations and or up, but it doesn't mean that individuals who are less or lower in a lesser role don't qualify for the Next Level Leadership Program. The other thing we have is we're partnering with Bookboon, which we have a lot of modules within our learning management system that allows you to get credentials and so on, as well as whether it's a video, whether it's completing a survey, some sort of development. And there's a lot of audiobooks. There's physical books that you can download, PDFs, and so on to help you grow. And it's not specific to security, right? If you wanted to learn a little bit about machine learning and there's an audiobook in there, you could download that audiobook for free and do a little bit of self-development. We are also partnered with other universities as well. So if you wanted to extend, let's say you finish a master's degree and you wanted to move into a doctoral program, we are partnered with individual or other universities as well to help grow your education.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. We do have a question here through the Slido app from Tian. Could you give us a concrete example of how hiring uses data to guide hiring decisions? Great question.
Yeah, that's a really good decision. So, interestingly, Allied Universal does not use the data itself to make a hiring decision. We actually depend heavily on recruiters and hiring managers to do the interview and make the decision. We do have an internal, I guess you can call it an AI-driven platform that allows you to do an interview, a video interview without having to meet a human. That does use some of the algorithms that kind of drive. It looks primarily for tone and voice. Did you answer the question, and so on. But the hiring decision is never made by the AI or the platform itself. It always ends up in a human's lap. But from a data perspective, we do use data to tell us because we hire so many individuals, to maintain 800,000 employees and ensure that we're meeting all the contract obligations of all of our clients. We do use data to tell us where there's inefficiencies in the process. Doesn't necessarily tell us how to make the hiring decision, but it does tell us who needs to do some hiring. So we do utilize a lot of business intelligence tools, dashboards, and so on. I create my own dashboards, correlation matrices, matrices, and so on to help understand where our gaps are in hiring, but not directly influencing the actual decision itself.
Thank you for that. And then real quick here, if anyone does want to come off mute to ask your question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll make sure to unmute you there. Another question we had, are there any mentorship programs or opportunities with joining the company as a new hire?
So we are new in our mentorship development. We have been spending a little more time on the internship side, but we usually do have a kind of informal mentorship program. Whenever you come into a role, usually you do hit the ground running rather quickly, but you always do get partnered with an individual that is, and it depends again on the role. If you think about the field versus the corporate office. Um, and depending specifically on the role, but you do get partnered directly with someone who's tenured in the role that can kind of show you the ropes.
Awesome. Any other questions? Feel free to use the Slido app, or you can raise your hand. We have a comment here from Zumi. Yes, so we will make sure to send out the recording, and then I'll make sure to attach Dr. Gilbert Guzman's contact information along with Allied Universal's career webpage as well. We have another question here in the chat from Abebe. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I'm an undergraduate at WGU in cybersecurity. I'm not sure of the requirements specifically, but I'm looking for an internship program. Do you guys offer any internships at Allied Universal?
We do offer internships. I'm not 100% sure if we have any currently for cybersecurity because we're just growing in that realm, but we do have internships on our IT side, which obviously we're in security, so we'll have kind of a component of that. But if you take down my information and send me an email, and I will follow up with you on that specifically.
Awesome. Perfect. Any other questions? Feel free to use that Slido app or raise your hand and we can unmute you there. We have another one. What are some things you wish you knew when you started your career?
That is a good one. I think I wish I knew where technology would be today. Although, computers, everything existed when I started my career, I think I would have been a little more technology focused. I've always been technologically, driven and advanced to some degree. I know how to do some coding and all that other stuff, but I wish I knew where it was going to be today so I could, focus more on the technology side of things, as opposed to kind of like leadership management and overall business.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions? I don't see any that has come through. But I'll make sure to follow up here with an email with the recording. And we do apologize for the chat feature. There is one more here. Are there industry-specific certifications for certain applications to perform data-driven gap analysis? Good question.
I have a follow-up question specific to Allied Universal or just in general.
Andre, if you can answer that, specific to Allied or just in general, doesn't specify in the question here. But while we wait for your
Yeah.
response, I think we have another one from Nathan uh, at Allied Universal.
So we use a platform primarily called Domo. It's a business intelligence tool. So it's a independent company. Primarily is where we house all of our data. I myself use pretty much everything that I can put my hands on, whether it's Microsoft products, Microsoft Power BI, Visio, Domo itself. I'd spend a lot of time in Excel, Um, I'll build a process, process mapping and anything like that in Microsoft Visio or even PowerPoint to some degree. But primarily everything lives in a single business intelligence kind of dashboard, where we have a independent business intelligence team that uploads all of our information, kind of talks through some of the information is API'd over, some of them are flat files that get loaded into the business intelligence platform. But usually it's just that we do use Salesforce on the sales side of things, which we obviously there's kind of integrated dashboards and stuff there, but primarily just Domo.
Perfect. All right. So follow up on Andre's question here. Are there industry specific certifications for certain applications to perform data-driven gap analysis? And Andre responded, in general, are there popular tools that we should know about?
No, I wouldn't say popular tools aside from, there are certifications and so on that exist beyond your degrees, right? I would say just in general, there's a lot of, Google has, whether it's project management, there's data analysis, there's Code Academy. It depends on what you want to do with the data. Do you want to be on the back end of data and really managing data from the information side and really managing the structure and query of data, or do you want to be able to, provide the narrative and interpret the data? Because there's the data science, there's machine learning, there's all of these different type of certifications and or degrees to some degree, that help you understand where you want to go with data, because within data themselves there's a lot of different languages within data, right? You have R, you have Python, you have C++. There's a lot of different languages that you want to do, so it all depends on what you want to do with the data. There's some people who get certifications just to understand and know how to read data, and then there's some people who are looking at the metadata, and that's the data of data, right? That's the information that lives within data, and and creating dashboards and so on. And then on the leadership side, there's the individuals who just want to know how to read and interpret data to make those informed decisions. So it all depends, on the path you want to do if data interests you. And then on the Allied Universal side, there's nothing specific that we have aside from, maybe some of our IT roles that may require, or some of our business intelligence. We do have some intelligence analyst roles that require you to be able to look at information and data, but it's not so much numbers. It's more so on the activity side. So it just depends on what field you want to get into.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert Guzman. Any other questions? I haven't seen any come through, or if you're not able to use that Slido app, you can always raise your hand and we'll let you come off mute as well. We'll just give it a couple more seconds here. Any other questions? Okay, let's see. We do have one from Charles. I worked as a security officer for Allied Barton and then Allied Universal, where they merged for 3 years. Great company. I just completed my master's in ITM with a PM 2 weeks ago. How would you recommend I position myself to be considered for a position with Allied Universal?
Congrats on finishing that. I would say email me directly, and I'll try to get you put into the right spot, especially if you have experience with the industry, you have a little bit of what we're looking for on the IT side. Because I will tell you, for anyone who is interested in kind of growing with the realm of AI, that's one avenue we're venturing down quite heavily, looking at optimizing systems and so on, whether it's a project side, whether it's enhancing, some of the buttons that we click within technology, just to, get us away from the paralysis by analysis, get our heads up a little bit, spend more time with clients and team members and employees. Feel free to reach out to me. But Charles, I would say definitely send me an email directly, and I'll try to get you in front of the right person.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll make sure to send that contact information out via email. So, Charles, keep an eye out for that. We have another question here from Nathan. Best study tips that have helped you achieve educational success? Good question.
Discipline. I would say discipline, and it's probably cliche to say that, but I would say discipline. Most of you on here are probably working adults, as I was. It's knowing the things that you have to, especially when you get to a doctoral level, it's knowing the things that you have to put away to some degree or push to the side. And often it is sometimes loved ones, but it's going to be discipline. So I would say just discipline and give yourself the time that you know you need to complete whatever you need to complete. Most of the time, we get kind of bogged down with work, and then we think, oh, I want to take a break, get away from the screen, get away from the computer, whatever that is. But if you give yourself discipline and actually spend the time, and then the only other thing I used to do is I used to read the end of a whether it was a journal or a document. I would read the end and then start at the beginning just to see what the ending was and knew if I needed to go through everything or could I grasp it at the end.
Perfect. Thank
This
you.
is cheating. I
Uh,
don't know.
yeah, no, when you said that, my thoughts were, oh, definitely an analytical person thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question here from Kim. Where do you see the biggest employment gap within data science?
Biggest employment gap in data science. I'm not sure there is one. I think if there is a gap, it's going to be market driven based off of the compensation philosophy of all the organizations that exist. The reason why I say that is because everyone is moving towards data science to some degree, right? There's some sort of data science kind of intertwined or enfolded within any organization you look at. So I think the gap is going to be the pay side of things, right? Some individuals or organizations that maybe aren't familiar with, whether it's data science itself, coding, and so on. I think they have a misunderstanding. So sometimes they offer less pay, which makes that gap in employment, right? There's the opportunity gap for them to fill a role. And then, understanding the job market itself. If you know that it's just basic supply and demand. If you know there's a demand for data scientists, then, and there's either a healthy, abundant supply or not, what is the value that that individual brings to what you're looking for? So if somehow we can ensure that everyone understands the kind of market philosophy and drives there, I think that helps eliminate or avoid and or mitigate the gap to some degree. But the other gap exists on the high end of that, right? You have your companies like Netflix and Google and Meta and so on that are housing a lot of these data scientists, and they're paying roles higher than some of the leaders that manage those individuals. So you're paying salaries higher than some of the individuals that manage those individuals. So I think if you just understanding what the market is and what you need to get out of the individual with data that has that background in data science, if you understand what that is, I think you mitigate that opportunity or that gap.
Okay, I do not see any other questions. I think we have all our questions answered. Love the engagement. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. So we will go ahead and conclude our session here. Just as a quick reminder, we'll be sending the recording along with the survey. If you could take a minute or so to complete that survey, we would greatly appreciate your feedback there. We'll also make sure to include Dr. Gilbert Guzman's contact along with Allied Universal's careers webpage. I know we didn't have the chat feature today, so if you have any questions later on, feel free to send those and we'll make sure that we get them sent over to Dr. Gilbert Guzman here. And then we also want to extend a thank you to Dr. Gilbert Guzman for your time and your valuable insight you shared with us today. Your experience and story and the passion and data have really enriched our conversation today. And thank you everyone for your engagement and for being flexible and in using that Slido app there. For our students and alumni, please don't forget to sign up for upcoming quest sessions as well. And then with that, wishing you, Dr. Gilbert Guzman, and everyone a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you.
Too, thank you. Thanks everybody.
Yeah,
Good
take
luck in
care. Yep.
all of your studies. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.